welcome to The Human Edge. This week's guest is Paula Keve. Paula is a powerhouse of a PR expert. We talked a lot about her career in New York, especially with the Dow Jones and Wall Street Journal. What a challenging role that was, and the insecurities that came with that from a work perspective, but also as a working mum. Paula was really vulnerable on the subject, and I think it's a must-watch for all working parents. It was a brilliant conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. I hope you do too. If you do, please like, please share, please subscribe, all of that stuff. It's going to be massively helpful. Thank you. You're most often behind the camera. You don't normally do this kind of thing. It's your clients that do this kind of thing. So what's your role in all of that?
Exactly.
And how are you feeling now being in front of the camera?
So, I mean, usually I'm there. So my role in it is a sort of, it's part of profile building, whether that's of their company or them as an individual. But so, I would sort of pick the opportunity, plan the opportunity, and then sort of run the logistics, brief them, help them, also look for feedback as they're speaking, like what kind of messages are they talking about? How do they come across? So small things, maybe they sort of have a nervous laugh that you want to correct, or maybe they're sort of leaning into one talk track a bit too heavily and you need them to go somewhere different. So I'll be sort of behind the camera, taking photos, and just monitoring and making sure they feel comfortable and that it goes the way we want it to go. And now,
and how does it feel stepping into their shoes right now?
It's good. I said, it's good to literally feel how they must feel, like sort of slightly nervous, quite watched in a way. Yeah,
quite watched. Yeah, it's funny because on the one hand, it's just me and you in here and Jez who's engineering. But on the other hand, it will be going out onto YouTube and the usual platforms, so that people are going to be listening and watching.
Yeah, exactly. It's that duality. It is just me and you, but at the same time, you're thinking about it in parallel as this thing that everybody's seeing.
Yeah. Yes. Let's try not to
maybe not a helpful thing to talk about straight off.
Try not to second guess ourselves during the conversation. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. One thing I was wondering as I was thinking about the conversation was, why PR? What was the thought process for going into that industry?
I don't think there was a thought process. And maybe that was quite common sort of in mine, dare I say, our generation, right? Like, you finish university, I did languages, I ended up at Bloomberg because they were very sort of multilingual, multicultural, and I ended up it was a philanthropy department, but it was part of marketing. So they would kind of give huge amounts of money to charities, to arts organisations. We'd make incredible projects, but we would use them for client communications or internal communications, all these things. So I went into that because I loved the arts. Like, it was no more, and I had new languages. It was no more complicated than that. And then from there, I sort of ended up drifting into PR, and lots of people sort of said to me, "Oh, you should be in PR. You should check it out. You'd like it." And I did.
Yeah.
And so that was that.
What was it about what they saw in you or what PR was like in those days that they thought would be a great match?
I don't know. I don't want to say maybe they thought I was a bit of a bullshitter, but it could be that I think it's that I really love people. I really love talking to people. I love, some people sort of, they only warm towards maybe people that they feel that they have something in common with, or something that, something they could maybe, get from somebody else. But I feel like I genuinely love all types of people. I can always find something interesting in anybody that I'm talking to. And so, I just love that process of finding out about people.
I'm going to admit something embarrassing. I don't really know what PR is. And I reckon you're nodding, and I reckon many people, PR, we've heard of PR, but if you ask them what PR is, they wouldn't be able to tell you. I'm no different. So can you give me a crash course, PR 101?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, I think, like you said, it's really common, and I think part of the reason for that is it has changed so much in the last year in the last 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. So that pace of change is growing exponentially. In the olden days, let's say, PR was ultimately propaganda, right? When you go on your PR courses and you learn about it academically, they always show you the poster of that sort of, the army recruitment poster of the finger pointing.
Yes.
And then, really evolved to be very much, getting people editorial, so non-paid profile, like people writing about you or your company in traditional media. So in, the Times or in the Wall Street Journal or, in any of the trade publications like Marketing Week or whatever it is, right? So that used to be really what PR was. But then what happened was, so social media happened. So it meant that the publications that were usually the sort of gateway to getting your brand known, now people were finding out information, not just news, but all that information through social media. So it meant it took away the power from these publications. And then with that, obviously the same thing happened on the marketing side, that where these publications used to get huge amounts of revenue from traditional advertising in their pages, that was all sort of taken away because people's marketing departments now in companies were thinking, okay, we're not going to advertise, we're not going to take a double page spread in the Wall Street Journal anymore, we're just going to do like Facebook advertising, which is, so much more targeted. And so that happened. So essentially social media and then the advent of like content and all of that has changed PR completely. So it means you can still go after, a great article in the Wall Street Journal, but PR is so much more broad than that. You can work with influencers, you can work, essentially it's ultimately just raising an individual person's profile or raising a company profile.
So here's a purely selfish question now. If I want to, and I do want to raise the profile of this podcast, how would I go about doing it?
Yeah, exactly. So a sort of business meeting.
This is the only reason I invited you on.
So first of all, by doing the podcast, obviously that is, one of the ways that you are doing it. And then, you've got to try and get great guests on there who are going to share the episode on their profiles so that gets awareness that way. And then, but there's also lots of different channels that you should be exploring on top of the podcast. So you can put paid behind anything that you put on social. That's a good way of doing it. Events is another kind of angle you can explore as well. But also don't forget about sort of traditional PR and actually using, trying to get yourself into publications. But then it's also about how you use it once it's done. How do you use it and how do you promote it?
Thank you.
We can talk more about it later.
Yes. Yeah. You mentioned the Wall Street Journal a couple of times, and I know that's close to your heart because you spent a long time as chief comms officer there. Was that part of the Bloomberg group of companies? How did the move? Because you moved to New York to take on that role, right? So how did that come about?
I started my career at Bloomberg, and my boss was a guy called Lex Fennick, who was CEO of Bloomberg at the time. Then I moved to New York with Bloomberg. No, hang on. Oh gosh. So after Bloomberg, I'm trying to remind myself now. After Bloomberg, I worked for BNP Paribas for 6 years. That was Paris, London. And then I went back to New York. I'd already worked in New York for a bit, but I went back to New York with BNP. Whilst I was in BNP, which is not British National Party,
obviously. It's a French bank.
Yeah, BNPP is how they shorten it there because of BNP. Lex had been hired to Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. So I happened to be in touch with him and he was looking for a chief comms. So that's how I ended up going from BNP Paribas to the Wall Street Journal in New York.
I was wondering whether, so this is, a proper US financial institution, and you're, a young British woman, right, who's taking on a pretty important job within that institution. So I'm curious, was there any hesitation on your part in taking that, or any insecurity around taking on that role at that time?
A lot of insecurity. Not so much because of the British piece, actually. I mean, I'm no longer an American citizen, but at that time I was an American citizen, you know,
Right.
so I'm dual nationality, but I felt really at home in New York, and actually really at home in the culture, in the corporate culture. I really like it. But yes, it was a really overwhelming role. It's, you know, there's 8,000 people in the company. You're responsible for PR, for internal comms. You know, Lex was an incredible boss, you know, is an incredible guy, but he is tough. And it's a complex web, you know, News Corp, and there's lots going on. And yeah, it's high profile. But it was an incredible experience. But yeah, I was definitely really nervous.
And if we can take you back all those years, what were the kind of things, what were the kind of insecurities that you were going through at the time on taking on the job, and maybe even kind of throughout your tenure there?
All of the issues were so much larger than I'd ever dealt with before. You know, like I'd had sort of crisis situations that I dealt with at BNP, but nothing of the magnitude that I had to deal with there. It felt like a very watched role. And you're dealing with people that are incredibly accomplished at what they do. So you have to make a decision that you're kind of just going to do your best and go for it anyway. And I had a career coach there, which was one of the best things I ever did, was get myself this career coach. She was really fantastic, Tanya Ezekiel. If anybody is American needs a recommendation. One of the things she said to me, it's very simple, but she said, it's your movie. So, you know, as in my life is, I'm the protagonist in my movie, you're the protagonist in yours. So why would you deny yourself an experience, a work experience, because you're nervous? Like if you try it and you fail, then it doesn't matter. Like claim it for your, you know, learn those learnings, do it yourself, just go for it. What have you got to lose? I don't know why, but that framing really helped me. And so
it's a question of control, I think. So many of us, whether or not we're in a high-profile position or whatever it might be in life, I think we feel like we're not always at the wheel. And it's not very empowering. It's the opposite. So I like that frame. It's your movie. It's like, for me, I think about it as I'm at the wheel of a car. And if you can get yourself into that mindset, then you take control. And I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and you take away the fear. Because, you know, if it doesn't go your way, it doesn't go your way. And the other thing that she used to say as well was, you know, like not everything can be perfect. So, you know, if you're in a board meeting and you don't quite say something the right way, or if, you know, you execute a campaign and it doesn't quite, you know, achieve the KPIs you set, or all of these things, you know, that's okay. Not everything can go like that, and I had to learn that.
That's an interesting one. When there's so much pressure on a campaign, for example, to hit certain KPIs, where's that pressure coming from? Is it coming from the business, or is it actually coming from you and your own expectations for what the campaign wants to achieve?
It's a great question, and I think usually with these kinds of, it depends whether you're like, if I'm running PR for a client and I set the KPIs and I might say, here are the suggested KPIs, they might adapt them. Or if you're a full-time, you know, you're a PAYE worker in a company and you just have quarterly KPIs, it's probably going to be a much more sort of a dual KPI setting exercise with your manager. So I think it very much depends where you are, but you'll definitely have input to those KPIs. So I'd say the pressure is dual. You know, it's you want to achieve them. You have to achieve them for the company. You're kind of on the line. You've said you deliver that, but also for yourself, like your sense of self-worth. It's really important.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, you know, so the PR, as you've explained it to me, I'm thinking So you're responsible for the communications of those two businesses, but yet at the same time you're responsible for your own, how you present yourself, your own profile. So there's like a dual challenge going on at the same time. This huge, you said it's bigger than anything you'd ever done before, but also the way you had to grow, I'm imagining, was kind of a similar scale of challenge.
Definitely. Definitely. And often with these things, you're so busy yourself trying to do your actual job, you forget about your own one, And
so how did you keep, was it the coach that kept you in check? How did you keep reminding yourself of the need to grow, the need to develop, the need to learn from the failures?
Yes, the coach was really good. And I think I've also learned along the way that the way to learn and that you'll always perform better in your job if you're bringing energy back from the outside. So it is really easy to kind of navel gaze, to just focus on like internal meetings or like just plowing towards your goals and like, getting everything over the line, managing your inbox, getting everybody taken care of. But if you don't go outside and sort of, whether it's something like going to a conference even, or just, meeting with other really interesting comms people of companies you respect, just networking, actually proactively doing it, getting on a few panels to talk about something big picture, all of these things. If you don't do that, you lose energy. You desperately need that in order to bring that back into the organization and have self-growth as well as actually, perform better at work.
That's a great perspective. And as you were talking, I was thinking of a observation you made earlier, that when you began the role, you were surrounded by really, really accomplished people. And if experience has taught me anything, it's that the most accomplished people still have the same insecurities, the same self-doubts as the rest of us. I wonder whether you saw a glimpse into that from the kind of these accomplished people that you were working with day in, day out. You didn't? Okay. they were very adept at their own PR.
No, they were really senior, and and at the time, now I feel, ironically now, I work with people of that seniority a lot through my consultancy business, and I sort of don't see them like that. I think, if anything, I see them in the, I see their vulnerabilities the most.
Yes.
But at the time, I was still relatively young, probably, compared to a lot of my peers. And I had less experience than them.
Yeah.
And I think they were very confident. I'm sure underneath all that, maybe not so much, but I never saw it at the time.
No, and they would be no different from the clients that you're talking about today.
Yeah.
But maybe you have a different perspective. And one of the reasons I'm kind of majoring on this here is because that's, for me, it's really important to, what I'm trying to create with the podcast is conversations with successful people that have had, and maybe still do, their own insecurities, because we're so much more similar than we are different. I think that's a really important message to promote. So let's talk about the role now. You went from, maybe not directly, but a kind of huge institutions to now running your own consultancy. What was the decision making around that process?
So let's think. I don't know whether there was a lot of. It's funny, my mum, who was a therapist, always used to say to me when I was worried when I was younger, like, often a decision actually isn't a decision. Often the path is really obvious, and you're just worrying about making the decision in advance. Yeah. And like, again, that's another piece of advice that I've really kind of tried to keep close to heart, and it applies for work as well as life. So I think it was just sort of obvious at the time. It just ran into itself, if you like. So I came back here after pregnant with my third child, really exhausted from kind of, that job at the Journal. The news cycle never stops. It felt like a crisis literally every weekend. I was really consumed with it. And whilst I think it was, just a phenomenal a phenomenal work experience. I mean, I really got so much out of it. I found it very difficult to focus at all on the kids. Even if I was with them, my mind just wasn't there. And so I was pregnant with the third kid, and my husband had an opportunity to come back, and I thought, you know, let's do it. Let's call it quits. And the Dow Jones and the Journal were incredible. They like helped move us back, and they were just really great. And yeah, so it was a really beautiful ending to that role. And then I had my third child here, and I took sort of a year. We say a year off, but it was basically maternity leave. I just hadn't taken proper maternity leave with either of the other two. And I've just really enjoyed being with the kids, and really enjoyed not having to share my mind space. So, and then the next thing I know, a friend of a friend who was comms at Spotify said, I know an investor who's starting a new project and needs some help. And so do you want to just speak to them? And so I spoke to them, and then I started basically consulting for a startup. And that's how it all began almost 10 years ago. So, like it wasn't a decision. It was completely happenstance, because I thought, yeah, great, this is perfect. I don't want a permanent job. I'm like excited by the concept of working for a startup. I've always done big business for 15 years. And it was just a really fun, they basically wanted to announce in 10 days. They had an agency in place. I just had to come in and kind of manage it all. So it didn't feel too difficult, but it was just brilliant. And so it just happened.
That was 10 years ago. What does the business look like now? How has it evolved, and how have you evolved in that period of time?
So even though it wasn't a decision, it was the best decision I ever made. And how have I evolved? I think I've learned to deal with the insecurity of it. You don't know what you're going to bring in from month to month, even though I've set it up in a way that's normally kind of long-term retainers. So there's less uncertainty, but it's still there, obviously. And a lot of people say to me, oh my God, I could never go out on my own. And I now think to myself, oh my God, I could never work full time anywhere. But I think I've really grown, because I've really grown my skill set, because whilst there's obviously a lot of common threads, and PR has changed, but it's still a similar skill set. I'm covering a much wider set of clients. Like it's not like I'm just, I just work with property, or I just work with one industry. I cover loads of different industries. So it's been amazing to learn about this like wide landscape of, business models and personality types and the operational models and all these things. So I've loved that. And I think I've grown to sort of just really focus on the work. What's really lovely about working for yourself is that, you realise how much, when you're in an organisation, how focused you are on essentially organisational politics. Like making sure you're positioning yourself, hang on a minute, that should lie with legal, it shouldn't lie with me, or that should do, or I should be in that meeting, why am I not there? All these really annoying, frankly, really distracting thoughts, which don't help anyone. They don't help you, they don't help the business, they're just derailing. Whereas now, I feel like I have one very pure and clean objective, which is to help the company and the individual that I'm working for, and to just produce the work, or be the sounding board, or mentor that employee, or whatever it is that they want you to do. And it's really lovely to take all the other stuff away.
All the other stuff has gone away, but there's other stuff in addition to the work, which is the running of the business. And that's, I'm assuming you've had to kind of learn that on the job over the 10 years. Is that would you call it a distraction, or do you enjoy that part of it?
I love that bit. Okay. So I love that bit. Yeah, I really do. Maybe this is really like I don't know, I want to say a better word than lame, but that's the word that's coming to head. But I love speaking to my accountant. I do. I love like planning.
I hope they feel the same.
Sorry?
I hope they feel the same.
Actually, he says he does, because
Okay.
he's like, wow, you're really into it, Paula. Every time I tell you to do something, you do it. I'm like, yeah, of course. I'm so excited. And I have created systems for things like, I've got my own balance sheet and my own spreadsheet that I keep, and I'm monitoring costs. I mean, big caveat here, Jules, is like, it's not a big business, it's really just me. But then I bring in freelance resource quite often when I'm working on projects. I have had like an employee or two in the past when I found great people, and but it's not large.
And deliberately so. That's an intentional decision on your part.
Very intentional. And that would be, definitely some advice that I would have for anybody that was starting up, is you've got to figure out who you want to be, because there's always options, right? Like I could have decided, right, I'm going to be my own boutique agency, I'm going to hire in people and start actually executing. Whereas now I tend to do a little bit more advisory, or like building strategies, or just working on like exec profiling within a kind of broader picture. So I've picked my work, and I'm going for work that's sort of like higher end, so to speak, or higher value, and as much as possible just me. Whereas I could have gone down like the boutique agency route, but I decided not to.
Is that because of the type of work you wanted to do, or the type of business that you wanted to create?
It was probably a stress decision more than anything. I felt like going down the boutique agency route, I'd have to hire people, the work would depend on their output much more than my own. So it felt riskier. And I thought, yes, you can probably ultimately earn more, and you're building something, and there's a lot to be said for that. But I've spent a lot of years working and not with my kids. And the whole goal of this project was to be able to be flexible, to have a little bit more time for the kids, or headspace for them. And so, I just decided I'd rather sort of earn well, but not really go for this kind of sort of gold per se, but just do a really good job and know that it's about me doing a good job. Because I get so much satisfaction from knowing that my clients have really enjoyed working with me, or they've really got out of the project what they wanted to get out of it. And I really depend on that. Like, I want that.
Do you ever feel any external pressure, not necessarily from the people around you, but from the world around you, to grow? Because I think we're somehow kind of told, or we understand somehow, that bigger is better. Right?
That is a great question and observation, because I do get that a lot. Loads of people say, I even noticed it when I sort of mentioned to somebody I'd hired someone or whatever. They're like, Paula Inc. is growing, or I can tell they automatically would assume that that's a positive, and they prescribe a positive value to that. But actually, what I'm trying to do is sort of grow my business, and then essentially develop like an investment business within that business at the same time as doing my PR business.
Because the kind of the thread is, if you're not growing, if you're not trying to become bigger, then somehow it's a failure. That seems to be the narrative in business. I don't know why that is, but that's...
I think you are 100% right, and I don't know why that is. And it's not necessarily a focus. It feels like, and I know other companies that have stayed small, and they just have a really healthy balance sheet, and like they don't want to go bigger, because then it would risk kind of what's actually a really good thing.
That's
right.
But
that story is just not as sexy.
No.
And so
we're coming back to you as a PR person now. How do we make success stories like that better known, sexier? Maybe these companies like that need to hire you. And
yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, I think that there's definitely a lot of angles there, like, big is not necessarily better and all of these things, and they just need to be told a bit more. I think, to be completely honest, I think one reason for that possibly is because, quite often I find as well with businesses, they don't really want to talk about numbers so much. And the success story of that sometimes is that the numbers look good, so you're going to stay how you're going to stay, but they don't want to talk about the numbers. Whereas if you're a growing company, it's like, yeah, we've doubled the number of people in the last 3 years. We're open new offices in these 5 different locations. You've got all those talking points that are somehow more colourful and less exposing.
Yes.
So that's one potential reason. I don't know.
Changing tack a little bit, we've talked about, so one of the decisions you made in relation to the current business is not to put yourself in a position that you were in when you left the US. I don't know if burnt out is the right way of talking about it, but you were
probably
the focus was solely on work. You had 2 children at the time, were pregnant with a third. You couldn't give them the focus, the time they needed. I've spoken to a lot of mums about that kind of balance between work and family life. How have you, in those days when work was all consuming, was it accompanied by guilt that you weren't able to spend the time that you wanted with the kids?
So much guilt. So much guilt. I'd say, like anything, it's a spectrum in terms of as a mum. Well, I mean, I say as a mum, but I should say as a parent. How much guilt you feel, how much sort of confidence you feel about being a great parent as well as being a working person. Yeah. And I know lots of brilliant women who are really caring mothers who do not and have not ever felt that guilt. I am not one of them. I really felt it, to toxic levels. I don't use that word lightly. I really suffered with it, and I gave myself a hard time for a really long time about not being a good enough mother.
Does that stay with you to this day?
I think it's dissipated in the last 10 years. Like I said, it's definitely one of the wins for me in doing what I've been doing has been that I do feel like I've spent a lot more time with the kids. Mostly because, a lot of the work is from home. I do go into my client offices and travel as well with work a bit, but it's, I'm at home a lot more than I was. So even if it's like a fleeting, hi as they come in the door and then you shut the door again and get back on your call, it still feels like something.
Yes.
So it's dissipated, but I can recall vividly how awful that guilt was. And actually one story which stays with me is we had friends come over from the UK, and we had a really amazing but full-time nanny when we were in New York. She'd arrive at 7, she'd leave at 7 basically every day. And sometimes she'd have to stay later if, Al and I couldn't get home from work. And when my middle son was maybe 1 or 2, she would leave and he would cry hysterically that she was leaving. And it sort of happened a lot, but it was just me and Al. So I would sort of be able to brush it off a bit. When these people came to stay, the mum just looked at me, and she didn't say it she didn't mean it in a nasty way at all, but she just said, "Oh my God, this must be so hard for you." And I just couldn't keep it together. And I just felt so, ashamed. And, it was bad.
And I'm sure that, so you said that you knew plenty of women that didn't have that, but equally, I'm sure that there are thousands, tens of thousands, whatever the number is, that do feel that guilt. And you made the distinction between, well, it's not just mums, it's parents generally, but really a lot of the guilt, I think, is societal, and that societal guilt doesn't point at the dads. It doesn't point at the dads at all.
It doesn't. But I do feel, in society's defence, I do feel like the guilt really came from within. Like, I don't feel that anybody in my circle, friends or family, was really sort of pointing out anything, or, you know, I didn't feel, maybe that's the trick of it. Maybe it's so insipid that I didn't realise it was societal.
Yes, your perspective of what a mum should be probably was formed from external experience and evidence.
Yeah. I also think I'm the product of a school system, you know, that really didn't do us any favours, where, you know, it was a really academic environment, a lot of pressure to be the best, you know. I remember sitting in an assembly when I was in junior school, and the head mistress was sort of, she drew this pyramid of marbles, and then she coloured in the top one in red, and she said, girls, this is you, this is who you're going to be in the world, this is you now, this is the jobs that you're going to have. And, you know, like the fact that I really, again, like it's one of those moments you just remember.
That's a junior school moment, so you were like 8, 9, 10, 11.
Yeah, I was young. And that expectation continued with me until 18. Yeah. And we all, I mean, I still have a lot of friends from that school, and we talk about it all the time. We had, you know, so we had these massive expectations. We have these massive expectations on ourselves of really kind of going great guns and having this amazing career. And a lot of us have had good careers, right, in different places. But nobody warned us about, like, the biological pull.
Yes.
And about how we would feel about that, about balancing it. Nobody talked about it ever. And so we were just kind of left with this awful feeling. And on top of which, the idea of sort of being the mum where you have the kid that doesn't have his swim stuff, like, that's also not acceptable, because we were taught to sort of be great at everything, including being a mum. So sort of the idea of forgetting something is unthinkable.
Yeah, and that's tough, isn't it? Because, and I've said this many times, but like being a parent is an exercise in failure on a daily basis. Yeah.
So
for all the great stuff we do, we mess up time and time again, day after day after day. And if the narrative is, like, from early on, you have to be great at being a mum too, every time you forget the swim stuff or the little things, that must really hurt.
Yeah, you feel like a terrible mother. But maybe, I don't know, maybe not everybody feels like that. I definitely did. And the fact that I wasn't in their headspace, that I wasn't picking them up from school, knew what was going on, the fact that I couldn't organise loads of play dates for them because I just wasn't able to sort of sort it out with the nanny and do it quickly enough. I wasn't at the school gate. I felt so bad all the time, and I didn't know what to do with that.
I'm wondering, I mean, this is a thought experiment, but knowing what you know now, if you knew then what you know now in terms of kind of the tools and techniques that we develop along the way to make us better parents, better people, if you knew all that then, even with the lifestyle that you were leading, do you think you would have done, in your own mind, a better job?
So this is a random one, bear with me. But just like Theresa May said, you know, there's no magic money pot. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I feel like there's no magic extra time. So I don't feel like I could have any specific tools. You know, there's a million different, like, you know, tips, tricks, articles, like sayings, memes, quotes of things you could do to, like, you know, manage your time better and also have time for the kids and also be brilliant at work. I think it's all rubbish because we only have a certain amount of time. We can't make it up. So, and like, you know, that's just unfortunately the rules of the world. So I think, I don't know whether I could have done anything different because I'm pretty organised. So I mean, the only thing I could have done differently is change my mindset.
That's really where I was.
There I was, like, there's no tool.
But how could you have changed your mindset? Was it specifically around the guilt or was it? Is it possible, do you think, no matter how all-consuming a job is, to be able to leave the job, you know, at the door when you walk back home again? There
are some people I remember speaking to, and like a senior person at the Times, who I remember her kind of flippantly saying, "I'm just really good at compartmentalizing. You know, I can just switch off and really focus on the kids." Possibly, I'm not sure whether I completely believe that. I think that, you know, technology has made it so hard for us to do that. Obviously, I don't know any working mum that doesn't struggle with, like, not kind of looking at her phone and checking messages or sorting things whilst they're with the kids. It's very, very hard to do. There's definitely people that are better at it than others, but it's hard.
So we've talked about the last 10 years. It's so difficult to forecast 10 years into the future these days, but your youngest is the same age as mine, so he's only 10, so there's still plenty of time to be spent with the kids. But as they grow older and the demands on you lessen, have you thought about what kind of direction the business is going to go in, you know, when kind of later on, let's say in 5 years' time?
I'm starting to think about it, and it is a really bizarre thought. You know, I'm sure you have it too. Like, you know, oh my gosh, what's life going to be like? And I think I've been so hand to mouth for so long. Well, one of the really exciting things is I'm actually taking a year off in January.
That is exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And it's, you know, again, I've had people say, wow, that's brave. Like, God, you know, you run your own business. You're not worried about sort of pausing for a year. And I am 100% not worried about it. You know, I was able to build up fairly quickly, and I'll just do my best, and we'll have to see where it goes. But I'm not that nervous about it.
And just before you tell me what you're going to be doing, which I can't wait to hear about, but what was the rationale, first of all, for...
I've worked so hard. I mean, I definitely feel like I haven't had that mum guilt, which has been revolutionary. And I think, like I said, it's about just, I'm at home a lot more, and I am able to be so much more flexible. So, like, you know, I can kind of do stay and play on a Friday, or I can, you know, you really can own your own time a bit more. Obviously, there's negatives of that, you know, the era of workation has started for me. But I decided because, I've worked.
You worked your ass off.
I've worked my ass off.
And you deserve it.
Yeah, that's kind of the conclusion I came to. And also just the ages of my kids. You know, one's going to go off to university in the next few years. And then, you know, Leo, I think the youngest one, the same age as Noah, he's got another year of me taking him to school, and then he's on his own. And I just thought, I really, really want to, like, revel in that. Like, I deserve that. I've earned that. I'm going to enjoy the silly conversations. I'm going to enjoy, you know, like, just being able to randomly say, oh my God, should we just quickly go and get an ice cream after school? Yeah, amazing, let's do it. And that's the sort of thing that I haven't really been able to do even in the last few years. You know, it's always been like, even if I've been able to collect him, it's just been like, yeah, okay, quickly grab your stuff, I've got to get back on a call. Like, it's just been rushed.
Yeah.
So I just want to be not rushed.
Yeah, and the advice you always get from parents of older children is, you know, no matter how hard it is, enjoy it, because you only get that chance once.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's front of mind, and I have also heard that advice. So I'm really looking forward to it. Everybody says to me, but you know, talking of pressures, when we're talking about, you know, this pressure to grow, that people ask you those questions. So the question I get when I tell people that I'm having a year off is like, what are you going to do with it? And I feel like there's this pressure that you have to do something really impressive. And I'm like, slow living. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Slow living.
And that in itself is really interesting. You know, we're living in London, which is a pretty busy, non-stop city.
Yeah.
And you know, you and I are of a certain age, right? So, and you know, our youth is over there, and there's kind of middle age, later age to look forward to, and so time is our most precious commodity. And I think the pressure is, you've got to be productive with your time. You've got to do something with your time. So this is really interesting when you're saying, actually, there's nothing specifically other than spend more time with my... I mean, that should be enough anyway, shouldn't it? But as you're saying, again, societally, it doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be. And I do sort of expand on it. You know, my mother's unwell, so it's sort of time. That's important to me. I spend a lot of time with her. But really, it's not more complicated than that. But you're right, there is this pressure. But it's also maybe, again, it's a self-pressure as well. Like, not just pressure from other people. Yes. What are you going to do with this precious time, but also for you? But that's why I don't want to put anything in it. I want to just enjoy it.
Yeah, and like many of the decisions that you've made, the right path will emerge, like organically.
Exactly.
And you have to trust that will happen again.
Which takes me full circle back to your question, actually, which is where do I want to take the business? And I think I'm trusting myself that those decisions will sort of make themselves. I have, you know, 3 different ideas a day of the kinds of things I could do with it. And I see opportunities for, you know, could I create sort of a lower cost, more commercialized almost product for this thing, or could I do this? You know, I'm always thinking about what the options are, but I'm just going to slowly think about them. And it could be that I go back to doing exactly the same thing. I don't know.
And that would be absolutely okay.
Fine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I'm trying really hard to sort of not put the pressure on myself to create it and trust that it will work out. Yeah,
well, I'm excited to see how it evolves.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for coming in today. Like many podcasts, I have one final question for you. So the podcast is called The Human Edge.
Yes.
And part of that is, you know, for me personally, I want to be growing and developing all the time. So I have an edge that I'm kind of leaning into. And so what I'm curious about is, what are my guests leaning into? What's their edge that makes them feel uncomfortable? So what's your edge?
I fear that you told me you were going to ask me this, and I totally forgot to prepare for it. So, do you mind just repeating the question so I completely understand it?
So absolutely. So it's for me, it's around growth, and we can only grow if we're putting ourselves in kind of a place that's uncomfortable for us. Our edge. For me, my edge is being more public. You know, putting my head above the parapet. I want to grow this. I think there's enormous value in the conversations I'm having with my guests. In order to do that, I need to build an audience, and in order to build an audience, people need to know about it. So that requires me to be much more public with it. So that's my edge.
Yeah. So, okay, I love it. So your kind of uncomfortable place for growth.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I have so many.
You can choose as many as you like.
Yeah, gosh. If only Al was here, he could list them. I think probably managing uncertainty. I do find it hard, sort of not knowing what's next, or just being okay with letting it lie. So that's why I'm talking you through it, as though like I'm, I've conquered it, but I obviously haven't. Yeah, that is hard. So that's definitely one area that I need to lean into. And another one would probably be patience, again, to just that, if you keep plugging away at something, it will ultimately happen. Quite often I just dive headlong into things, and that maybe doesn't produce the best outcome.
Okay. Why is patience a challenge for you?
Because I just, I like to work at a really quick pace, and I like everything to just be fast and, boom, 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 which is why I love New York.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's not always the way of things.
Yeah, well, the next 12 months, when the break kicks in, that's going to be a real challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
Living life in the slow lane for you.
I know. And
I definitely
really
want to see how that unfolds.
And I really want to push myself into that.
Great. Thank you, Paula.
No,
it's been a really wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.